The leather of the booth was cold against his back. Alessandro De Luca watched the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass of the private dining room. Below, the street was a river of hurried umbrellas and yellow cabs. Here, on the 40th floor, there was only silence. A respectful, fearful silence. His men stood by the door, statues in tailored suits. Nico, his most trusted, stood closest, his eyes scanning the room, the hallway, everything. Always watching. The man across from Alessandro, a developer named Sterling with sweat on his brow, had just finished his pitch. It was a deal worth millions. A new high-rise on the West Side docks. Alessandro's territory. He hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. He just listened. His stillness was a weapon more potent than any threat. Sterling shifted in his seat, the sound of his expensive suit rustling in the quiet room. "So, Mr. De Luca," Sterling began, his voice thin. "Do we have an understanding?" Alessandro picked up his water glass. He studied the condensation, the way it traced a path down the crystal. He thought of rivers. He thought of time. "My understanding," Alessandro said, his voice a low gravel that filled the space, "is that you wish to build on my land, using my port, and you are offering me a respectable percentage." Sterling nodded eagerly. "The most respectable." Alessandro took a slow sip of water. He placed the glass down with a soft, deliberate click. "Your respect is noted," he said. "Your offer is not." The blood drained from Sterling's face. I don't understand." "You will," Alessandro said, a simple statement of fact. "Nico will explain the terms to you." "My terms?" He made a subtle gesture with his hand. "Dismissal." Nico stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling." "This way." The developer, pale and shaken, was escorted out. The deal would happen. But it would happen on Alessandro's terms. It always did. He was left alone again with the silence and the rain. He owned this city. Its veins were his, the flow of money and power a pulse he controlled with an iron will. Yet, he felt nothing. An empire of ghosts. A kingdom of one. He was about to signal for his car when the door to the dining room opened again. It was not Nico. His guards, Luca and Marco, instantly tensed. Their hands moved inside their jackets. It was a woman. A girl, really. She wore the simple black and white uniform of the restaurant's wait staff, but it was wrinkled, tired. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her face was pale with exhaustion. She held something in her hand. She took a hesitant step into the room, her eyes fixed on him. She did not look afraid. She looked determined. Luca took a step to intercept her. "This room is private." Alessandro raised a single finger. Just a twitch. Luca froze. Marco stilled. Nico, who had just returned, stopped in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion. This was a break in a protocol that had been unbroken for 30 years. No one approached Alessandro De Luca uninvited. No one. The girl walked slowly toward the table. She stopped a few feet away, her breathing a little shaky. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. Alessandro just looked at her. He said nothing. She held out her hand. In her palm was a crumpled $5 bill and a small, wax-paper-wrapped sandwich. "I saw you earlier," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Outside. Sitting on the bench in the park." He remembered. He took his walks. Alone. Without his men. It was the only time he felt like a man instead of a monument. He had been sitting there for an hour, lost in thought, the collar of his old coat turned up against the wind. He must have looked lost. "You looked hungry," she continued, pushing her hand forward a little more. "And cold. My shift just ended. I thought you might need this more than I do." Alessandro stared at her hand. The $5. Her last $5, he was sure of it. The sandwich, likely her own dinner from the diner down the street where the vinyl on the booths was cracked and the coffee was cheap. He looked up from her hand to her eyes. They were brown. Kind. And in them, he saw a ghost. A memory from a lifetime ago. Elena. The same kindness. The same simple, impossible goodness. The world stopped. The rain, the city, the millions of dollars being negotiated, it all vanished. There was only this girl, with her tired eyes and her small, profound offering. An act of pure grace in a world built on sin. His world. Nico started to move, to intervene, to remove this impossible interruption. Alessandro raised his hand again, this time more firmly. A clear, undeniable command. Stop. Nico froze, his shock visible for the first time in a decade. Alessandro De Luca, the shark, the king of the docks, was being offered a charity sandwich. And he was allowing it. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is not just a story about money or power. It's a story about a debt that could never be repaid, and a gift that would change an empire forever. We want to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment down below. And if you enjoy stories that show the power of a single act of kindness, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get back to the story. Alessandro De Luca was a name whispered in boardrooms and back alleys with the same mixture of fear and reverence. He had built his world from the rubble of his past. He arrived in this city as a boy with nothing but holes in his shoes and a fire in his gut. He learned the city's unforgiving language quickly. The language of strength. The language of control. He took what he needed, and he held what he took. He was ruthless, efficient, and brutally fair by his own strange calculus. His word was his bond, and his bond was iron. He oversaw a network of businesses, some legitimate, some hovering in the grey shadows of the law. Shipping, real estate, unions, restaurants. It was all a part of the machine he had built. But the machine was fueled by a single, cold memory. Her name was Elena. She was the love of his youth, a girl with eyes like the girl in his dining room and a laugh that could silence the chaos of the world. They had dreams. A small house. A garden. A life far away from the city's grit. But he was young then. Ambitious but not yet powerful. One night, walking home, they were cornered. Two men with a knife, looking for a few dollars. He fought. He fought like an animal. But it was not enough. Elena was caught in the crossfire of a meaningless, random act of violence. She died in his arms on a cold sidewalk. In that moment, the boy Alessandro died with her. The man who stood up was someone else entirely. He vowed that he would never be powerless again. He would become so powerful that the very fabric of the city would bend to his will. He would build walls so high that nothing and no one could ever touch what was his. And he succeeded. He hunted down the men who took her from him. That was his first lesson in justice. His justice. Over the next 30 years, he built his empire stone by bloody stone. He became a king in a castle of his own making. But the castle was empty. The walls he built to keep the world out also kept him in. His one unbreakable rule, the only legacy of Elena he allowed himself to keep, was simple. The innocent were sacrosanct. Women, children, civilians who were not part of the game, they were to be left alone. To harm an innocent in Alessandro's territory was not just a mistake. It was a death sentence. His walks through the city were a pilgrimage. He would shed the expensive suit and the aura of power, put on an old coat, and just walk. He watched families in the park, listened to street musicians, saw the life he ruled but could not join. He was searching for something. A ghost. A feeling. A memory of the man he was before he became the king. And now, here she was. This girl. Clara. Nico's report came the next morning. It was thorough, as always. Clara Rossi. 24 years old. An orphan. No family. No connections. She worked 2 jobs. A waitress at the fine dining establishment, The Pinnacle, where she'd met him. And a counter girl at a 24-hour diner called The Lighthouse on the other side of town. She lived in a small, run-down studio apartment in a tenement building in the Narrows. The building was owned by a man named Marcus Thorne, a real estate bottom-feeder known for exploiting his tenants. Clara was 2 months behind on rent. Not from irresponsibility. Thorne had hit her with a series of illegal building improvement fees and had raised her rent twice in 6 months, violating city ordinances. She was barely making enough to eat, let alone pay his extortionate demands. The report detailed her meager finances. She had exactly $7.42 in her bank account. The $5 she had given him was, quite literally, almost everything she had in the world. There was one more detail. A small, poignant fact that Nico had included. She had a sketchbook. She dreamed of being an artist. She spent what little free time she had drawing the city, the people, the moments of quiet beauty she found amidst the struggle. That was her dream. Art school. A dream that was being slowly crushed under the weight of her reality. She was drowning. And yet, she had seen a stranger she thought was in need. And she had given him her lifeline. Alessandro sat in his vast, silent office overlooking the harbor. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. On his desk, next to stacks of financial reports and contracts worth hundreds of millions, sat a crumpled $5 bill and a slightly stale sandwich. He stared at them. This small offering. This impossible gesture. It was a grenade thrown into the quiet, orderly fortress of his life. He remembered Elena giving her scarf to a shivering child on a cold day, leaving herself to tremble in the wind. "We have enough warmth to share," she had said, smiling. He hadn't thought of that memory in 30 years. His mind, a cold and calculating machine, was now at war with his heart, a dead and buried thing he thought had long since turned to stone. The boss, the pragmatist, told him to forget it. This was not his concern. The girl was a civilian. Getting involved was messy. It was a distraction. It violated his own directive to keep the 2 worlds separate. But the man, the ghost of the boy who loved Elena, could not let it go. He saw the same spark in Clara. A light of pure, unadulterated goodness in a world that did everything for the idea that such goodness deserved to exist, to be protected, to flourish. He slowly reached out and picked up the $5 bill. He smoothed it out on his desk. The face of Abraham Lincoln stared up at him. Honest Abe. Alessandro let out a short, humorless breath. What would a man like that think of a man like him? He made his decision. The war was over. There was no choice, really. There had not been a choice since the moment she looked at him with those eyes. He buzzed the intercom on his desk. "Nico." "Yes, sir. I want a full financial workup on her landlord. Marcus Thorne." Nico nodded. "I've already started." His small time, but loud. A lot of tenant complaints, all dismissed. He has friends at the housing authority. "I don't care about his friends," Alessandro said, his voice dropping to that familiar, dangerous calm. "I want to know where every penny he has comes from, and where it goes. I want to know who he talks to, who he owes, and who owes him. I want to know the name of his dog." "Understood, sir." "And Nico." "So." Alessandro finally looked up. His eyes were cold steel. "I have a feeling Mr. Thorne is involved in something that disrespects our way of doing business. Find it." It was not a request. It was a prophecy. Nico understood perfectly. The boss was not just gathering information. He was ordering ammunition. "It will be done," Nico said. He turned to leave. "One more thing," Alessandro called out. Nico stopped. "The art school she dreams of. The New York Academy of Fine Arts. Find out the cost of tuition. To the penny." Nico's composure finally cracked. A flicker of utter astonishment crossed his face before he could mask it. This was beyond anything he had ever witnessed. The boss did not give gifts. He brokered deals. He collected debts. He maintained order. He did not engage in acts of charity. So? Nico asked, his voice barely a whisper. You heard me, Alessandro said, his gaze returning to the crumpled bill on his desk. Get it done. Nico left, closing the door softly behind him. Alessandro was alone again. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in protest. He had just set in motion a series of events that would ripple through his world. He was breaking his own cardinal rules. For a stranger. For a memory. For $5 and a sandwich. He felt a strange sensation, something he hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't power. It was purpose. The report on Marcus Thorne landed on Alessandro's desk less than 24 hours later. It was worse than he had imagined. Thorne was not just a slumlord. He was a predator of the highest order, preying exclusively on the city's most vulnerable. The Narrows tenement was a cash cow for him. He illegally subdivided apartments, ignored safety codes, and used intimidation and fraudulent fees to bleed his tenants dry. But that was not the worst of it. Nico, with his unparalleled ability to navigate the city's dark undercurrents, had found the real story. Thorne was laundering money. And he was doing it for the Falcone family. The Falcones were rivals. Vultures who lacked Alessandro's code. They dealt in narcotics and human misery, activities Alessandro had long forbidden in his territories. Thorne was using the inflated rents and fake fees from his buildings, including the one where Clara lived, to wash their dirty money. He was using the suffering of people like Clara to finance the operations of Alessandro's enemies. In his city. Under his nose. Alessandro read the last page of the report and felt a cold, familiar rage settle in his chest. This was no longer about a girl. This was about a profound violation. Thorne had broken both of his laws. He had harmed the innocent. And he had shown ultimate disrespect. He had brought the enemy into Alessandro's house and fed them with the bread of the poor. The plan formed instantly in his mind. It was not complex. It was simple. Direct. Final. He called Nico. Assemble the team. We are paying Mr. Thorne a visit. Tonight. How many men, sir? Just you, Luca, and Marco, Alessandro replied. This is not a negotiation. It's a correction. Marcus Thorne's office was on the top floor of a sleek, modern building in Midtown. A monument to greed built on the back of suffering. The night security guard saw four men in dark suits step out of a black sedan. He reached for the phone. By the time he lifted the receiver, the lobby was empty. Nico had disabled the security system and the elevator controls from a tablet in his hand. They took the stairs. Silently. They moved with the fluid, practiced precision of soldiers. When they reached the top floor, the lavishly appointed hallway was empty. Thorne was working late, just as Nico's surveillance had predicted. The door to his office was thick oak. Luca, a man the size of a small mountain, did not knock. He simply put his shoulder to it. The lock, the frame, and the wood splintered with a single, sharp crack. Marcus Thorne, a man with a smug face and a $3,000 suit, looked up from his desk, his eyes wide with shock and fear. He saw the four men file into his office. He saw the door hang broken on its hinges. He saw Alessandro De Luca. And the smugness evaporated, replaced by raw terror. De Luca, he stammered, scrambling to his feet. I wasn't expecting. What is this? Alessandro walked calmly across the plush carpet. He gestured for Thorne to sit. Thorne sank back into his chair as if his legs had dissolved. Nico and the others took up positions by the windows and the broken door, their presence sucking the very air out of the room. Alessandro stopped in front of the massive mahogany desk. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the crumpled $5 bill. He placed it carefully in the center of the desk, on top of a stack of eviction notices. Thorne stared at it, utterly bewildered. "Do you know what this is, Marcus?" Alessandro asked, his voice quiet. Thorne shook his head, unable to speak. "This is $5, Alessandro continued, his eyes locked on Thorne's. "It was given to me by a young woman named Clara Rossi. I believe she is one of your tenants." A flicker of recognition, then dismissal, in Thorne's eyes. "A delinquent tenant. I don't see." "She gave it to me because she thought I was homeless and hungry," Alessandro cut him off, his voice hardening. "It was almost all the money she had. Money she didn't have to pay your illegal fees. Money she couldn't use to buy food for herself. And she gave it away." Alessandro leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk. "You, on the other hand. You have everything. This office. This building. And you use it to steal from people like her. You create fake fees. You raise rents to push people onto the street. You prey on the weak because you are too cowardly to face the strong." Thorne began to sweat profusely. "Listen, De Luca, this is a misunderstanding. It's just business." "No," Alessandro said, the word ablaid. "This is business." He gestured to Nico. Nico placed a folder on the desk next to the $5 bill. "This is also business," Alessandro said. "The Falcone family. You've been washing their money through your rental properties. You take the desperation of good people and you turn it into capital for my enemies." Thorne's face went white as a sheet. He understood now. This wasn't about a tenant. This was about a king whose laws had been broken. "I have two rules, Marcus," Alessandro said, his voice now a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "You broke them both. You harmed an innocent. And you brought filth into my home." He straightened up. "So, we are going to make a correction." Nico opened the folder. It contained a series of documents. "You are going to sign over the deed to the Narrows tenement building to a holding company I control," Alessandro stated. "Effective immediately. The building will be brought up to code, and the rents will be frozen. All outstanding debts and fees for every tenant will be forgiven." Thorne stared, his mouth agape. "You will then liquidate your other assets," Alessandro continued. "The proceeds will be placed in a fund for the tenants you have victimized over the years. A repayment." That's everything," Thorne choked out. "You'll ruin me." "You were already ruined, Marcus," Alessandro replied coldly. "You just didn't know it." "And what happens to me?" Thorne whispered. Alessandro looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You will disappear," he said. "You will leave the city tonight with nothing but the clothes on your back. You will never return. You will never contact anyone from your old life. Your business here is concluded. Permanently." The unspoken word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Marcus Thorne looked from Alessandro's cold eyes to the faces of the men standing by the door. He knew it was not a choice. It was a mercy. With a trembling hand, he reached for the pen Nico offered him. He signed. The next day, Clara Rossi received a certified letter. She opened it with dread, assuming it was a final eviction notice. Instead, it was a legal document from a firm she had never heard of. It stated that the ownership of her building had changed. It stated that her past due rent and all associated fees had been paid in full by an anonymous party. It stated her monthly rent was being reduced by 50%, effective immediately. She read it 3 times. It made no sense. It was a miracle. She sank onto her lumpy couch, the letter clutched in her hand, and for the first time in months, she cried. Not from despair, but from relief. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. This one was thick, embossed with the crest of the New York Academy of Fine Arts. Inside was a letter of acceptance. And a second document. A full, 4-year scholarship, covering tuition, housing, and all art supplies. Funded by the Elena Foundation for Aspiring Artists. A foundation that had not existed a week ago. Clara couldn't breathe. Her dream. Her impossible, foolish dream was not just alive. It was real. It was happening. She didn't know who. She didn't know why. Some anonymous benefactor. An angel she would never be able to thank. From a black car parked across the street, Alessandro De Luca watched her run out of her building, laughing and crying at the same time, clutching the letter to her chest. He watched her look up at the sky as if thanking God himself. Nico sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. "The Elena Foundation is established, sir," he said quietly. "Initial funding is secured from Thorne's liquidated assets." Alessandro said nothing. He just watched. He felt the ghost of a smile touch his lips. It was the first time in 30 years. A week later, he walked into the Lighthouse Diner. It was 2 in the morning. The place was nearly empty. Clara was behind the counter, wiping it down. She looked different. The exhaustion was gone from her eyes. It was replaced by a light. A vibrant, hopeful light. She looked up when he sat at the counter, and a small smile of recognition lit up her face. "You," she said. "The man from the park." "The man from the park," he agreed. "You look better," she observed. "Warmer." "I feel better," he said, and it was the truth. He ordered a coffee. She poured it for him, her movements quick and efficient. As she set the mug down, he placed something on the counter. A crisp, new $5 bill. "I wanted to return this," he said. "And thank you." She looked at the money, then back at him. She shook her head, pushing it back toward him. "No," she said firmly. "You keep it. You looked like you needed it." "I did," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "More than you know." "Good," she said with a simple nod. Then it served its purpose. He looked at her, at this girl who had unknowingly reshaped his world. "You gave me more than $5, he said. She just smiled, not understanding the weight of his words. She started to turn away to help another customer, but then she paused. She looked back at him, a curious expression on her face. She had seen him in a fine restaurant. She had seen him looking destitute in a park. And now he was here, a quiet, powerful presence that didn't quite fit in the worn-out diner. And then there were the miracles. The rent. The scholarship. A strange, impossible thought began to form in her mind. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Are you a good person?" The question hung in the air between them. The most direct and most difficult question he had ever been asked. He looked into her honest, searching eyes. He thought of the empire he commanded. The deals and the threats. The violence and the order. The cold, hard man he had become. Then he thought of the last week. Of protecting her light. Of righting a wrong. Of Elena. A sad, small smile touched his lips. "I am what I need to be," he answered, his voice thick with unspoken history. "But for a little while. You reminded me what it felt like to be a good man." He slid a small, plain white card across the counter. It had only a phone number on it. Nothing else. "If you ever need anything," he said. "Anything at all. You call this number." She picked up the card, her fingers tracing the embossed digits. She looked from the card to his face, finally understanding. Not who he was. But what he was. Her guardian. Her anonymous benefactor. Her angel. "Thank you," she whispered, the words full of a meaning she couldn't possibly comprehend. He simply nodded, stood up, and left a $20 bill on the counter for the coffee. He walked out of the diner and into the quiet of the pre-dawn city. He felt lighter. The king had left his castle. And for the first time, he did not feel the need to hurry back. 5 years later. The art world was buzzing about a new talent. Clara Rossi. Her exhibition sold out within hours. Critics praised her work for its raw emotion, its humanity, its ability to find breathtaking beauty in the ordinary. Her signature pieces were portraits. Charcoal sketches of the city's forgotten faces, imbued with a dignity and grace that moved viewers to tears. She was happy. She was fulfilled. She lived in a bright, airy loft in a part of the city she once only dreamed of walking through. In a small, velvet-lined box in her desk drawer, she still kept a plain white card with a phone number on it. She had never used it. She never had to. Her world, once so precarious, was now safe and secure. She felt a quiet, invisible shield around her, a sense of protection she could not explain but never questioned. Miles away, in a penthouse office overlooking the harbor, Alessandro De Luca sat behind his desk. The office was different now. He had begun the slow, arduous process of turning his empire legitimate. The shadier enterprises were being sold off or shut down. The legitimate businesses were expanding, managed now through a parent company named the Elena Foundation. Nico, now more a CEO than a lieutenant, was being groomed to take over everything. The old world was fading, making way for a new one. Alessandro was older. The lines on his face were deeper, but the coldness in his eyes had thawed. On his massive, uncluttered desk, where billion-dollar contracts once sat, there was only one object under a heavy crystal paperweight. A faded, worn, $5 bill. It was his compass. His anchor to a part of himself he had thought was lost forever. And on the wall behind him, in the space once occupied by a Monet, hung a single, framed piece of art. It was a charcoal sketch. A portrait of a man sitting on a park bench, his face lost in thought, his expression a mixture of profound loneliness and quiet strength. It was the first piece of art Clara had ever sold. She had sent it, years ago, to the anonymous P.O. box of the Elena Foundation, with a simple, handwritten note. "Thank you for believing in me." Alessandro looked at it every day. He saw the man he was. The man she thought he was. And the man he was trying to become. A single, selfless act of kindness had achieved what no army of rivals or lawmen ever could. It had not conquered his empire, it had redeemed it. That crumpled $5 bill did not just buy a moment of warmth for a stranger, it bought a second chance for a king who had forgotten the language of his own heart. It was a quiet reminder that the greatest power is not found in what a person can take by force, but in what they are willing to give away freely. And that sometimes, the smallest gesture can purchase the one thing money can never buy: redemption.